Hello and welcome to Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz, and you are listening to Episode 2, Part 2 of Advocating for Our Art Form. This was a impromptu addition to the episode. As I explained a little bit in Part 1, I'll tell you a little bit more about that here. Originally, the intent was to do this episode in one part, talking about specifically the way we need to or should want to speak about music education to our colleagues and to our communities. And then I started thinking a little bit more about it and having trouble separating in my mind the idea that music education was somehow different than its logical extension, which is how our students take the music out into the world and perform in the quote unquote private sector outside of the classroom, beyond the education that we give them. So I decided to reach out to Dale Trumbore and have a conversation with her. And this was inspired by a Facebook post that I saw of hers. We don't know each other in real life, just in e-life. And I follow her activity as a composer and different things that she talks about online, and saw that she had written an article about a very similar topic, which was to simply reflect on how people tell their stories as artists online. And I found the article very interesting, and I commented and I read the article and invited her to come on and have a conversation. So you'll be hearing that in its unedited form in just a little bit. Episode 2, Part 2 is brought to you by SightReadingFactory.com. Sight Reading Factory is my only go-to resource every single day that I use as a teacher. I have a lot of great resources that I use, but Sight Reading Factory is my everyday, within the first 5 minutes of class, resource. And of course, most of you know what it is, but for those of you who don't, it's a website that spontaneously and with high level of customizability, not sure if that's a word, but it can customize to a high level your sight reading exercises to meet your needs for that day. So what I do is I keep it up on my screen. In between classes, I reset it for the next class to change some difficulty, give some concepts that I'd like to work on that day, and it's all ready to go. We can do our sight reading in about 7 or 8 minutes, and we get daily practice with it. And it's a really great resource. Just to give you an example of fun ways that you can use it, just yesterday, I put up an exercise and then used my marker to draw on the exercise and created a path through the 8-measure piece where the kids had to start out on one line, and then where the arrow happened, they had to switch to another line, and everybody had to switch lines without stopping. So you can take all of their customization, and you can also do lots of creative things on top of that. So it's a really great resource that you should check out. And of course, if you enter the code Choralosophy at checkout, you'll get 10% off. So as we move forward into the conversation with Dale, I just wanted to give a couple of thoughts about the topic ahead of time, just to kind of put you again in what will be probably the mode of operation for this show, is to put you in the frame of mind that I'm coming from, so that you have a frame of reference as I ask the questions, and you'll have a little bit of insight then, hopefully, into the interview that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise had. With music education advocacy, as Elise and I talked about in the last episode, I feel like I wear a different hat, meaning when I talk about music education for the students that I work with, it's all about the kids and how it benefits them. And I totally agreed with Elise about that. It's got to be about the kids. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. I struggle even accepting compliments at a school concert. It's an awkward thing for me. I don't enjoy doing it. Parents, though, they want to share their gratitude for the hard work that I've done with their kids. And I don't want to shun that, meaning I want to recognize that they are truly grateful for the hard work that I've done with the kids. And of course, behind the scenes, I know that I've done a lot of really hard work, and sometimes some really good work, sometimes some shoddy work, but I've worked really hard. Doesn't change the fact, though, that when they come up to me after the concert and say, "Oh, Mr. Muntz, you've just done such amazing work with these kids. You should be so proud." It's very hard for me to say anything other than, well, these kids are they're great. They worked really hard and I'm proud of them. And I don't think that's disingenuous. There's nuance there. And I'm all about nuance. And that's kind of the point of this show, is to try to dive into some of those things. I don't think we really should say anything other than that. Meaning, I don't think I should take that compliment and say, "Ah, yes, I have worked miracles. You should have seen your dumb student when they came to me. I've really polished a turd." Well, no, of course not. I'm not going to say that. And so what I respond is to turn the compliment back on to the kids, even though it was directed towards me and I appreciate it. So when I'm wearing that hat, I think advocating for and selling, so to speak, music education should start with and end with how it benefits students. And that's absolutely true, and I agree. In my life, though, I wear other hats. And I also run a community organization that does not have a built-in audience like my parents do, or like my students do with their parents who just show up and, Hercules, Hercules. We have a built-in cheering section at school. When I am working with Copyright KC, we don't have that. Every single concert, we have to go out and make an ad campaign, and we have to convince people to come out of their houses, sometimes in bad weather, and in Kansas City, when there is almost certainly other really awesome arts programs to go see, and we have to convince people why they should come to ours. And the reality is, even though we're all friends and lots of our colleagues know each other in Kansas City, it's a competition. We are competing for people to show up at ours because that means they didn't show up at someone else's and vice versa. So when I wear that hat, I have to be able to talk about why someone should come to our event. And sometimes that can look like a statement of lauding our own abilities as an ensemble. And of course, as the leader of the ensemble, that means that it could come across as me lauding my own abilities. And it's a tricky line to walk. And I think Dale's article grabbed me because it talked about authenticity and vulnerability. And I think that is absolutely true. She hit the nail on the head, and I hadn't really thought of it in those terms before. And so our conversation, I think you will find stimulating. It's a way for us to kind of dive into this fine line between self-promotion for the sake of ego and self-promotion for the sake of furthering our art form, so that more people know about it, so that more people come to it, they support it, both financially and by putting their butts in seats at concerts. There's the whole side of our art form that is not supported by the taxpayer. It's not supported by built-in audiences. It needs audiences to voluntarily show up to survive. We can't give our singers a grade in a community organization. They show up because they want to be there, and audiences show up because they want to be there. So one of the fundamental principles that I think is important to establish before I send us off to the pre-recorded interview with Dale Trumbore is that I make a distinction in my mind and in my interactions with my colleagues between egotistical behavior and confidence. And I think our job is to portray confidence in our abilities as artists. And here's how I define the difference. Egotistical behavior sounds like this: I am really good at this, and in some contextual way, I make you feel like by me saying I'm really good at this, that means I'm better than you. To me, that's an egotistical way to frame things, and if it comes across that way, then it will come across as egotistical. And obviously, I think that's something to avoid. In other words, I'm good at this. The subtext means I'm better than you. That's egotistical behavior. Confidence could simply be defined as a person communicating that they are good at something. Full stop. Meaning, my definition for whether or not I am competent and feel good about my abilities in making music and directing music and teaching music has nothing to do with you at all. It's something that I've worked on for myself, my own journey through skills, through deficiencies in skills that I had as a younger conductor. And it's been a battle between me, myself, and I for almost 20 years in the profession of trying to become better than I was yesterday. Figuring out a way to communicate that, I think, exudes confidence. Because if it's not a comparison to another person, then I don't see it as threatening in any way. And I actually enjoy when my colleagues express that type of confidence. If I get the sense that it is truly a self journey where someone is exulting, even on Facebook or in person or in a tweet, exulting about something they accomplished, I give them the benefit of the doubt. Meaning, I don't automatically read into that someone is posturing themselves, trying to make themselves look better than me, anything else. My assumption in the first case will be that person is just really excited about their art form. So as we go into this conversation, that's your frame of reference anyway for how the host feels about the topic. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. In fact, I would love to continue this conversation with listeners. As always, you can tweet me at Choralosophy on Twitter. On Facebook, you can find the same show name, and on Instagram. That's a weird place to have a conversation, so probably choose one of the other two. You can also email me if you want to keep it private, choralosophy@gmail.com. And we also have a kind of hidden or closed Facebook group called Choralosophers that you can request entry to, and you can have any of these show topic conversations there, and with a great group of growing teachers and conductors that would like to have these types of conversations in a safe place. And as always, you can find supplemental material at choralosophy.com related to the show, including the article that Dale and I will discuss in the next segment of this episode. I will switch over now to a stream of a pre-recorded interview with Dale Trumbore. All right, so I'm here with Dale Trumbore, who is a composer based in Los Angeles, and we do not know each other, but I found a post that she made on Facebook that my radar just went off. I was super excited by the content because she touched on something that is directly related to this topic for this episode, where I will be talking to you all about the idea of promoting choral music and advocating for the importance for choral music and why it matters to people. And she wrote an essay about ways that people post or share or comment about their art form, about what they're doing in their career, and kind of about the way I took it was discussing the nuance and the fine line between inauthentic self-promotion and genuine, I love my job, here's what I get to do, this is a cool thing I want to tell my friends about. And I think we all feel that. We all walk that line. And then, of course, probably go back later and think that maybe some of the posts we made didn't fit that description and wish we hadn't done it or said it differently. And so I thought I'd bring Dale on and just chat about this. And so, Dale, welcome.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Good. Why don't you tell us first about what inspired this essay and that Facebook post? Where were you at when you wrote all this?
Yeah, so I write a lot for various online publications and the California CDA print magazine, and this was written for that magazine. And I do a lot of thinking in general about things in the music world that I see composers doing that I think we could do a little better. And a lot of that comes down to what I think I could do better, or something I'm currently working on in my own life. And that's basically where this essay came from. It was my realizing, I think about a year or two ago, I realized that sometimes I get tagged in a post and my instinct is both that I have to share it immediately. Like, of course I should be self-promoting, but as I've been lucky enough to get more performances of my work, if I share everything, I think it starts to feel less personal. I think I start losing that connection that I would like to have with anyone who's engaging with any content I produce. So this essay really came out of that sense of how do we be a real person? How do we keep a personal connection as we share? And then how do we think about what we share and how we share it? What is the story behind what we're sharing? And I think if we just come back to that kernel of a question, then if that motivates everything we post, then we'll have much more engaging content.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And one of the things that I feel, of course, I'm not a composer. I wrote a piece once in college, uh, but I've never subjected anyone to it. But I'm a conductor and live in a couple different worlds. So I teach at a public high school where I don't have to promote. The audience shows up because their kids are there. And
Right.
we don't have that element really to our job at all. I mean, you do kind of have to promote in the sense that you recruit kids and you try to get them involved in the program and do have to tell a story that the program is of quality and that kind of thing. But it's not nearly the same. But then on the other hat that I wear, I direct a professional choir where if we don't promote ourselves and get people to show up, then we go out of business. We stop existing. And I would imagine there are composers who self-publish or even in the traditional publishing world, uh, there would you say it's fair to say that if you simply told no one anything about what you did, then you would stop working?
I think, yeah, I don't know if I would stop, if all performances of my music would stop, but they'd certainly be reduced. I think a lot hinges on how I promote myself online. And then also, of course, there's the human element of showing up to things like ACDA and all of that. But um, yeah, I think even it applies to traditional and self-publishing
Hmm.
as well too. It used to be that we could rely on publishers to just promote us as composers and sort of sit back and let them do all the work for us. And I don't think that's true anymore either.
Right, I agree, and I feel like that's also true in the community choral organization world, where 20 years ago, when I was coming out of college, as I date myself, I the choral organizations that existed that I knew of were kind of funded on the old model where a bunch of blue hairs in the community got some money together and put together a group, and it might have been the only group in town, and so there was lots of promotion built on that. And then 10 years ago when we started ours, uh, we joked and called ourselves the Facebook Ensemble, because if it weren't for Facebook ads being free back then, there was no way people would know who we were or that we existed. We couldn't afford to put a print ad in the newspaper or anything like that. And I imagine as the economy, uh, I'm switching over to audio only because I'm getting some spotty internet.
Okay, would you like me to do that too?
It's up to you. Whatever your screen is showing you, it's fine. Um, but as we started promoting ourselves on Facebook, then we were able to get an audience and get some traction that way. And I imagine in this new world of internet publishing and for composers, there's got to be some parallels there in the sense that if you are trying to get started as a composer with no name recognition, no traditional publisher behind you, then there would be a certain amount of, even if you do show up to an ACDA convention and shake hands, nobody knows who you are, that kind of thing. And you do have to tell that story. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think it does come down to being and having a business in a way. And I know that plenty of composers would prefer not to think of themselves this way. And if they have that luxury, then great. But I know for me, this is what I do for a living. This is what pays my rent and my bills. Now I have a handful of piano students and I write music and I
Hmm.
do everything that comes with that. So if I'm not promoting my music and people aren't buying it, then I'm not getting paid. And obviously that's part of a much bigger conversation about how all of that comes together. But at the same time, I want to distinguish myself. I want my voice to feel unique. I want that in my music, and hopefully the music does speak for itself. Hopefully, if you're encountering my music for the first time at a festival or a colleague's concert, then hopefully that stands on its own for its merit and all of that. But at the same time, if you've never heard of me and if you're not encountering my music in the world yet, then I do want to make a lasting impression. And again, to me, that comes down to storytelling. Marketing is storytelling. And as long as we ask that, again, as long as we come back to that question, then we can't help but tell a story that's uniquely ours.
Yeah, and I think that's very fair. I think one of the things that causes this um, trepidation that we all have when we try to walk the line of I guess you could say advertising your business versus shameless plugs slash inauthentic posts, as you talk about in your essay. There's part of it I think comes from what I see in conversations with colleagues, a conflation of two issues where they see someone promoting their work, and it seems to be the assumption automatically is that that person is promoting themselves, with some subtext that I don't think is always there. And the subtext that people tend to read into it is, here's that cool thing I'm doing because I'm better than you.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think people really do that. Like, I think maybe it does sometimes happen, but I think it is possible for someone to say, I'm going to actually take this right out of your essay where you quoted and said, posts that you see like humbled to be working with this amazing ensemble. Well, I've posted something almost verbatim to that, but I genuinely was humbled to be working with that ensemble. It was I was standing in front of a group of collegiate level all-stars from colleges all over the country, and we were together working for a week on a concert, and I was standing there in front of them going, how do I get to be here? Like, this is so cool. And so I think you're right in the sense that those posts get made by people, and it can be taken all kinds of ways. But I also think that people oftentimes are genuine. It's just that we don't. It's like things are lost in translation on the internet. If you don't really know someone, you don't know where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And in the essay, what I intended, and I think, like I said to you on Facebook, if I could have gone back, or even now, I've thought about revising this essay slightly to make this point clearer, although, again, it was published in print, and I wanted to keep the online version more or less similar to what was in this magazine. But my issue with posts like that, I've made those posts too. The most common one I see from composers, besides that one, is the so excited to share with you my new recording, or so excited to share with you my newest piece.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that statement. And there's absolutely, of course, there's nothing wrong with feeling humble and grateful to be working with amazing collaborators. I know we all feel that. And by all means, we should be sharing that kind of success and those feelings. But for me, what I've found in my own promotion is when I take it one step further and I share the why behind those statements, that's what gets a much more genuine, what feels genuine to me, and what also gets a much greater reaction from everyone who's seeing that. It's what keeps those posts from looking the same one after the other. I've scrolled through Twitter and I've scrolled through Facebook, and I've seen that post just like 5 composers in a row. So excited to share this recording. So grateful to work with this ensemble. And that's where they stop. And it's not that I think those are bad. I think those are average posts. I think there's so much room for better posting and more engagement. And it's not that hard. It doesn't have to be 3 paragraphs on every little thing that went wrong with a premiere. We don't want that, right? That's, I mean, if you feel genuinely compelled to share it, that's fine. But that's not exactly what I'm calling for here either. What I would love every composer and conductor to do every time they post is just ask themselves, what was unique about this experience? And when I felt the emotions I felt, of if they were ones of gratitude and excitement, and I want to share those emotions, why am I feeling them? And then maybe it's just one more sentence. And that's really, again, in my opinion, that's all it takes to make your post stand out and to make you stand out as a human being who, even if no one knows your music, if they're just seeing, I know on Facebook, we all have lots of friends who, or maybe not all of us, but I have a few friends friends in quotes, who I've never met before, who are conductors who maybe I hope to work with, or they maybe saw my name once and I popped up on Facebook and they friended me. If we're trying to make an impression on people we haven't met yet, then I think it does take that extra little step to be just to say this is what makes us who we are.
Yeah, that's a great explanation, and that gives me some food for thought too. I was thinking about the example I shared with times where I've posted something similar, and so using your advice, maybe what I should have done was said that I was humbled to be working with this amazing ensemble because some of these students I knew when they were 14, and I've watched them grow, and they've gone on to get music degrees, and I'm so proud of the adults they've become. Because that is the behind the scenes of why I was so humbled and feeling so grateful to get to work with them, because I knew these kids as kids, and I've gotten to watch them grow up, and now they're choosing to come back and sing with me in the summer, and that's just like it makes me almost get teary. And so maybe they're
That's an amazing story. Yeah, that I mean, if I read that, I would probably tear up. That sounds incredible.
yeah, and I think maybe
Yeah.
my instinct on why I might have left that out, and this is just an anecdote. Of course, I've posted lots of things about groups, but the anecdote I'm thinking of in particular, what I think my instinct would have been at the time would be to share more, would be even more self-congratulatory, and so I think
Hmm.
maybe sometimes we try to keep it short, just so that we don't bother people, but we still want to spread the word. And so maybe it's about thinking more deeply, as you suggest in your essay, about what story are you telling, and including a little bit of why. I'm reading another line here from your essay where it says, when you're promoting your work in a real way, you have to be willing to be a little vulnerable. And I think maybe that's the example I just shared. My vulnerability would have been expressed when I shared that, these how much these kids mean to me, that they're not just singers that stand in front of me and make noise to make me look good, that I really care about them. So maybe that's the vulnerability that I missed.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that came up, I agree absolutely with everything you just said. Um, I do think one of the interesting conversations and responses that came up when I did post the article was that we not all of us are always in a position to have that kind of vulnerability, whether it would actually threaten um, someone's perception of us, or potentially be a turnoff that could lead to our getting less work, or whether it would mean exposing a true facet of ourselves that we think would become a point of contention, um, even if it's for really horrible reasons or irrational reasons. We just don't want to share that part of ourselves. Sometimes, too, we're under contract and we can't share quite the way we'd like to. Like the group we're working with wants us to withhold certain information or something, or not take photos or videos, or there's all sorts of different elements that come into this idea of sharing and vulnerability. But I think it boils down to what you said. We do have to be willing to be a little bit vulnerable if we're opening ourselves up in a human way. And then also it varies on a case by case basis. I really think it depends on what we're sharing and what's available to us at the time, what emotions are available to us, and then the more practical realities. And I totally understand that too. Again, if I could go back and change the article slightly, it would include more of this, and it would try and be a little subtler about the fact that I truly don't begrudge anyone their successes. I think we should share our successes, but it's a kind of nuanced issue.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think that's another thing that one of the things I commented on your post was that it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, actually, is that how much I tend to find myself in conversations with people that seem to have this, what I call the fixed pie fallacy mentality, which is that there is a finite amount of success that can be had in our field, and if you get some of it, that means I will get less of it. And it seems to be there's like maybe a jealousy component to it sometimes for people. Whereas I've always taken the position that in order for our art form, and I say this now in the big picture from the composer and the performer and the teacher and all of the people who participate in this type of art, choral music and or instrumental music, all of that stuff, that in order for that profession to and that art form to grow and be something bigger and better and more exciting than it is now for the next generation, we have to go out there and tell our story. We people can't see us as just something to facilitate young kids singing in public schools, because if we don't go take it to that next step and say, tell the story that kids could be singing this music as they become adults. They could be 35-year-old engineers who sing in a great community choir and make this part of their life forever, or else what are we really even doing? And so I think that if we have a growing pie mentality, then we might see other people's posts about their success and say, yes, that is a bigger piece of the pie now. And now there's room for us to continue to sell each other's success and go on and share each other's posts and say, look at what my friend is doing. This is so cool. I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think especially for composers, again, that's what my experience has been on this end of things. The more we see ensembles, especially if it's ensembles who have never commissioned before and they're commissioning for the first time, or they're prioritizing new music in a way that they weren't before, that only benefits all of us. And so whenever we share those successes, or tell the story of why working with an ensemble who's never commissioned someone before was so gratifying, that only encourages others to do the same. And I think it extends even beyond musicians to just to sharing with our community outside of the arts why we love what we do and why we're so passionate about it, and why it brings us great joy when we have those successes, in terms of shifting some of the perceptions about the arts, or just bringing more people to the arts who wouldn't necessarily come to a choral concert, but if they see your narrative about your concert presented in a really compelling way, they might buy that ticket that they weren't planning to buy before. So it only benefits all of us to do this, to share when we can, and it's very important to add that disclaimer, when those resources are available to us emotionally, etc. It benefits us to share in a really human way.
I agree that's really well said. And another way I sometimes think about it is, what other segment of society / the economy, what other industry doesn't have to do that? And in other words, why do we think we're special? That people should just show up without us telling them why?
Yeah.
That's a very strange mentality to me. Almost like I see people just in our sometimes in our world with a little bit of an entitled sense of people should just know that the arts are valuable and should therefore support them and show up, which we think the arts are valuable. We know they are. We've all had that experience. That's why we're doing this for a living. But I don't know that it might be a little bit self-centered to think that other people should just inherently know that. I think that's kind of our job. Is to share that, is to explain to people. I've used the term with another segment on this same episode, evangelizing a little bit for what we do. Every other job has to do that. So there's a certain amount of we have to kind of earn it in a sense.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way about that common phrase that I've heard composers say before, where like, oh, well, the music should speak for itself. So I don't have to write a good program note about it, or I don't have to promote it at all, or I don't have to share it, or I don't have to have an email newsletter, like all of these things that go into self-promotion. And again, if that's how you think, that's fine. By all means, you don't have to promote your work. But I just think there's so many benefits to doing so, especially when money does play a factor in your life, and it plays a factor in almost all of our lives. So, I really, to each their own. By all means, you can choose to do whatever you'd like, but for all the reasons we've just talked about, I really think it all just comes back to telling a story.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you are a composer or a choral organization that truly doesn't have to advertise and people will still show up or perform your work, that more power to you. I mean, that would definitely mean that you are doing something really special. I would imagine, I don't have statistics in front of me on that. I can't imagine that that is a very common thing. Um,
No, all of the ensembles I'm thinking of, everyone still promotes, even if it's just promoting it within their community on Facebook, they're still promoting,
of
they're still
course.
sharing,
Yeah.
whether they have a huge budget for that or not. And you don't need a huge budget either if you're, I mean, it's great to have one, but for those of us who don't have a huge marketing or publicity budget, uh, I think it does come back to crafting those stories and crafting them with care.
Right. One of the kind of mantras that I drum in front of audiences and in our email list and for Contras when we're raising money, when we're making that ask for people to support us, one of the things I will usually communicate is that none of us in our organization are doing this to make money because there isn't enough money for us to do it for a living, but it costs money to do it.
Mm,
And that is true. I think if it is your living or a side gig, kind of like our choir is, where uh, singers are paying for babysitters, they're buying gas, they're doing all kinds of making investments of time and money, giving up teaching a voice lesson that might pay better to come sing in the choir, and so the money isn't the motivation for us doing it. I think as artists, that's most of the time true, in the sense that if we won the lottery tomorrow, most of us would still be artists. That the reality is it still costs money for a composer to pay their rent and um, take a trip to hear their music performed, or what all these things cost money. And so I think part of what we can do is we can do a better job telling the story uh, about what it costs um, in choral organizations. That's something we're working on right now. But that doesn't mean that we're greedy. It's
right,
you know. So
right.
I
And
think
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was, oh, I was going to say, even within composing for a living, I'm increasingly comfortable talking about the fact that yes, I would just like to make a reasonable living, and I do. I've built up this career over the last 12 years, since I was in my late teens going into college. I've been trying to make writing primarily for chorus and for instruments my living, and I have, and there's no shame in that. There's no shame in the money part either, in wanting to make money,
Hmm.
because it supports my ability to make good art, or to try to make good art. It gives me time. Money is time, and so self promotion is necessary for me. It might take on a different shape for anyone else, but I think we can bring money into that equation and say this is what we need to support, maybe not even just making the art, but also to give a good living to the musicians making it. I think that's maybe even the next step beyond what you were talking about. And there's no shame there either. We deserve to make, if we're good at our craft and we are constantly trying to make ourselves better and we excel at what we do, we deserve to be paid well for that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. And in that vein, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, why don't you tell us whatever you feel comfortable telling us about any exciting projects you're doing and where we can find them?
Sure. I'm really excited to be writing a piece that'll be premiered at the NCCO conference this November for the University of Maryland singers. And I sang with them in the Chamber Singers, and in their other concert group when I was a student there. And so for me, it feels like a homecoming to not just have this big premiere at uh, a place, or at an exciting, national conference, but to be coming home to a place where I spent 4 years and just truly loved the music community there. It feels like giving something back to them in a way, getting to work with the conductor, Ed McClary, who was my conductor during my time there. And I actually wrote the text myself, which was terrifying, but that's something I've been doing more of, because actually when I was at the University of Maryland, I studied music and English, something I talk about fairly often. And the text is about getting engaged, and I am engaged and I'll actually be married before the premiere. So it has all these overlapping levels of personal meaning to me. And now, as I'm thinking about how I'm going to write that piece, my job is to translate all of that into what hopefully feels meaningful for the singers and the audience.
Well, congratulations on all of those things. That's
Thanks.
really cool. What a neat project. So where can people find your music?
They can find it at my website, which is just my name, so daletrumbore.com. And I post frequently on, well, less frequently on Facebook, but very, very frequently on Instagram and on Twitter. And I aim to do everything we've just talked about. I don't always succeed, nor do I always come up with a perfect story to tell to make something compelling, but I certainly try on all of those different sites.
Well, and that's good. And I will tell the listeners that is going to be true of myself as well. One of the things I will be trying to encourage people through these episodes is that, like I said before, we should be celebrating each other's success, but also giving each other grace and the benefit of the doubt on all of these things,
Absolutely.
because we're all in this together. This is one big group project. That's the way I see it, and that's a cool thing. And so what I will do, Dale, is when this episode goes live, people will be able to find on my website information about you, and also a link to the essay that we discussed, as well as just a link to your main page where they can take a look at your music and hopefully find something that works for their choir.
That all sounds great.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on with me. Any final thoughts?
I hope everyone listening asks themselves the next time they post, what is unique, special, or different about my story, and how can I add, even if it's just one sentence or one phrase more to a post sharing a concert or a piece. I hope you come up with that if the timing's right for you, and you can be vulnerable in that way. I hope you do it.
That is excellent. I couldn't agree more. And I want to thank you again for spending some time with me this morning and coming on and sharing your story with our listeners.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dale, and hope that you feel empowered to go out and tell your story authentically and vulnerably. You at least know that you'll have one cheerleader. Two. Dale and I will both be cheering you on as you tell your story about our art form that we all love so much. As always, you can head over to the Choralosopher's Facebook group to discuss the episode, and also head over to choralosophy.com to check out some awesome offers from the great show sponsors that we have and affiliates with the show. Show them your appreciation for this content. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time, episode 3, What's in a Gesture, with Bradley Ellingbo.